Breezes is having, they're trying to have a half-time town manager, which a town that's their size
We're ready.
for affordability.
We are ready? Okay,
there's
let's
still-
call to order the meeting of January 13th, 2020. 2020, yes. Roll call, please.
Member Carey,
Present?
Member Hutchins,
Here.
Vice Chair Mark Marsh,
Here.
Alternate Member Hennigan,
Here.
Alternate Member Lemmings.
Present.
Let the record show Member Kosinski and Chairman Garay are absent with notice.
Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning. I'm winging it here this morning. Do we have any commissioner comments?
I have one item. Last fall, we changed our meeting date from the second Monday of the month to, I believe, accommodate staff. But it seems like to allow for holidays, it's causing a little bit of scheduling confusion for some of us. So I just wonder, how is it working for staff?
It's working better for us due to the amount of packages that we have to prepare. So we have to prepare town commission packages, planning and zoning, and also septic to sewer committee packages. So if the meetings are too close together, it causes overtime for staff, which we're trying to get away from. There are, with this new schedule, there will more than likely be I believe, January and February meetings will be impacted due to a holiday, but the rest should be okay. How is the meeting schedule working for the committee?
It's fine with me.
Yeah, it seems to be fine. Just getting used to the once a month,
Right,
which is good.
Like the 8 o'clock.
Yeah,
okay,
good.
okay, good.
Any other comments?
If anyone has a cell phone on the table, if you could just remove it from the table, that might be causing the feedback.
There we go. Okay,
That's spooky.
just one other comment. Rick and I attended a commission meeting last Monday, I think it was. And there were a couple of issues. The main item of discussion was the, artificial turf ordinance, which was passed at first reading, I think 3-1 by the commission. However, it goes for a second reading. When is that?
February 2nd,
February 2nd.
February 3rd, sorry,
Third.
first Monday.
And I would suggest if any commission member can attend to express for or against, I think it would be helpful, because there seems to be a kind of a lot of misinformation as to what, artificial turf, or what this town is trying to do to somewhat control the propagation of that system. And it's coming down to feelings that it's taking people's rights away and that kind of thing. And I think, I personally think it's a little bit of misinformation, but anybody that could attend or can attend would be helpful, I think, for the cause. Okay, approval of minutes. Motion?
Make a motion to approve. There's a couple of questions I had about it.
You can bring those up now if you'd wish.
Beg
You
pardon?
can bring those up now.
Okay, bring those up now. On page 3, top line, and this may be my misunderstanding of some things, but the very fifth word in, all over, that there is an all over in the garage. I don't know what an all over in the garage is, but,
I think it was an louver, I don't know how to spell that.
Oh, okay.
So it might have just been a typo.
Louver.
A louver.
So we will
Okay.
correct
Yeah, it was
that.
a typo.
and then same paragraph, last sentence, after some debate, the conclusion was that the pool setback is 7 foot with 6 inches. I'm not sure with 6 inches.
And 7 and 6 inches.
Beg pardon?
7 and 6 inches, 7 feet and 6
It is 7.5 feet.
Yeah.
Okay. 7,
7.5 feet,
okay.
okay.
7 foot, 6 inches, or maybe it's just
Right.
take the word width out.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Motion?
I move to accept the previous meeting's minutes
As amended.
as amended.
Second, yeah.
I'll second.
Okay. Call the roll, please.
Carla, call the roll.
Member Carey,
Approved?
Member Hennigan,
Approved.
Vice Chair Marsh,
Yes?
Member Hutchins,
Approved.
Members Lemming,
Approved.
Thank you. Okay, draft ordinance regarding sheds. I think I was successful in missing all the discussion on sheds. So I would, Rick, you've been through this, right, on the shed,
I've
if you wouldn't mind.
looked through it, all right.
If we want to have Brian just present
Yeah.
real quick.
I'll just give you a real quick kind of background. This, a little while ago, I'm not sure exactly when, but I know it's been several meetings. This item came in front of you for, I guess, basically discussion and direction at that time, and you all gave some input on what you would like to see. And I know after we got that input, we also had the town's planner, Corey O'Gorman, take a look at it as well. And he had noticed several other things, not just dealing specifically with accessory structures, but the code itself, such as certain definitions, such as yard front, where it talks about setbacks, and then it talks about, okay, so if it's adjacent to a body of water, then the part adjacent to the body of water is also the front yard. So we're kind of trying to, what we may end up doing today, and I apologize for not getting this to you until I think it was maybe Thursday night or Friday morning, or maybe Friday morning when you actually got this. You may want to kind of take a look at it and give staff some further direction on certain things, because we kind of had some questions, and also I needed to point out to you before we even get into the sheds that just the change in the definition of front yard impacts certain things, such as, say, fences, because their code says fences are not allowed, can only go up so high in a front yard. So if we remove the definition, if we say that, okay, your rear yard, but if it's adjacent to water, is not a front yard, but it's a rear yard, then that would allow a fence to be higher. So do we need to address that? So there are certain things that have kind of come up in this, and rather than getting, kind of delving into that, I think what we thought we would do is kind of get it in front of you and let you all make your comments and kind of look at it and maybe give us some further direction on how you would like to proceed. Because the reason that we started kind of getting into the fences is we're referencing fences in as far as dealing with sheds, where if you have a 6-foot-high fence, then the fence can go up against the 6-foot-high fence. It can be a larger size shed. But then you can only have a 6-foot-high fence in your basically your side or rear yard. So those are some of the things that we kind of started encountering when we were looking at this. We've also provided for a definition of a private dune crossover in order, because that's another thing that was dealing with accessory structures, and that we noticed that we needed one for that. But just getting into otherwise accessory structures in the particular section on utility sheds, you'll notice that there are at least, there's kind of like 3 different sections there There's the provision that if it's prefabricated, that no plumbing, no electric, doesn't exceed 100 square feet or 7 foot in height. If there's a fence governing between that, a 6-foot high fence, between that and, or vegetation separating that and an adjacent property. And then we have that, requirement or that language in there that talks about, fence or vegetation. So that's another change too, because right now we've kind of been looking at, well, you've got to have a fence there. But if we, but we're allowing vegetation too. So if somebody has a hedge up there, then it can encroach into the setback. And then we talk about the 25-foot size shed that is no higher than 4 feet. That can go anywhere. There's no restrictions on that. It's basically just probably a little, I'm looking at that as a little thing to put your pool equipment in or something, that we aren't really going to govern that at all. Then we also provide that there are certain administrative things. Once, if you get into the higher shed, the 100 square feet, that you've got to administratively, it's subject to administrative review by the town, but not really a building permit. And those were some of the discussions we had the last time. And so I'd be happy to get your input and hear your discussions this time on that if you have some, some other comments. And then the last thing on here, you'll see that we've added also dune crossovers on here. What we've also realized, and that they are accessory structures, that we were having an issue on, or not an issue, but we needed clarification on how we were treating dune crossovers where the property was split by a road, and which is allowed by your code, but it seems in the past there may have been some issues where dune crossovers were allowed, where the property that it applied to was not really right beside it the way the code kind of said it should be. So we're trying to kind of provide some some clarification on that as well.
Okay, I don't know if the commissioner would like Corey to come up and just give us a fill in the blanks here from what Brian had so wonderfully described.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. Corey O'Gorman. My review really was taking a look at accessory structures in a general sense and how they are viewed by the overall code, which is why I provided the input on the definitions. And one of the things that I found in reviewing the code is that much like a lot of codes in the past, they've been amended over time, so they're not always not all the language aligns necessarily. So in the definition of front yard, and that's one of the things that Brian pointed out a little bit ago, is that it also includes waterfront properties, which causes some difficulty in interpreting requirements and how they might apply to specific properties. So that's some of the background on how I was looking at it. And in terms of dune crossovers, as Brian pointed out, they are clearly accessory structures. They are not currently well defined in the code, and we were looking for some guidance in the code to be able to adequately enforce the regulations, as well as provide clear direction to both applicants and the town. If you have some specific questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them. As I say, mine was really an attempt to take a look at the initial proposed language changes, how it fits in with the other portions of the code, and look at it from a perspective of interpreting it for future projects.
I have a question on the dune crossovers. So are we talking about an elevated platform that, or are we talking about somebody can pour a concrete pad on the dune?
That would be an elevated platform.
Okay, an elevated
Absolutely.
platform.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how was 500 feet arrived at?
I think that was pretty arbitrary, to be honest, just trying to come up with a square footage of an area that could be a reasonable sort of deck area where the crossing itself would be 5 or 6 feet wide, and then provide an area that could be used, provided all other regulations are met, for folks to sit and enjoy the view along the top of the dune.
And this same 500 feet would apply if it were a single-family dwelling or a multifamily property?
Yes.
So that's about the size of a two-car garage, is that right?
It is, yes, sir.
Pretty good size.
It is.
Small for a multifamily, kind of large for individual. So, and is that having any adverse impact on the dune, having that there?
That's a good question. I think any of the dune crossovers have to be permitted by the state. So they would look at the impact on the dune, and would have to balance the size of the crossover and any platform with any impacts on the dune.
So-
I don't really know the answer to that question.
So
to
it's
be
a
honest.
platform with railings, built-in seating, what are the flexibilities? Is it defined what this?
Really doesn't, no, just tries to provide the ability for a property owner to provide that area.
Can they put a shed on it?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Rick. Yeah, I'm concerned with that 500 square feet. I think I'm actually doing a June walkover right now with a deck. And as you said, it is reviewed by DEP. It's not a very rigorous permitting approval. It's staff approved. So it's subject to negotiation. But I think 500 feet is, even using the walkover itself and the platform, seems to be a relatively high area. Just for a technical thing is, the state is more concerned about what touches the beach. If your platform is high on the dune level, there's more flexibility. So that again could be abused.
So it could be on pilings?
Yeah, it has to be.
Could be elevated?
Yeah, but anything that touches the beach itself, which is the active water area, is what DEP is more concerned about, area-wise. But it does not, they're fairly flexible once you're upland or up dune on the higher elevation. And that's what, 500 feet, you could go down to 4 feet for a walkway and then build a 20 by 20, platform, which is substantial. And, I personally think it has some effect on the dune by covering, obviously,
You're not going to get the plant life under the
Right.
deck to stabilize the dune, so.
So I'd like to, I'd just like to see if we could find some better references on that square footage. Wayne, sorry.
Yeah, just a little background information. We tried, when looking at the 500 square foot number, we tried to not make the existing decks non-conforming. Because it does include decks at multifamily as well as the single family. So I don't know if we can differentiate the difference, if that would help, but.
The risk in that, of course, Wayne, is that everything balloons up to the size
Right.
that you were
Yeah.
trying to make non-conforming. So we have, everybody starts building 500 square foot decks.
Yeah.
And that's what eventually will happen.
Should we be looking at a percentage area?
It depends. I mean, I don't think there should be any difference personally between multifamily and single family. I think it's, again, the word non-conform, which you opened with, is the key there. We don't want to base things on non-conformity. I don't know. I mean, I think the best thing to do is look at an average and see what the average size is, especially in this town, because we have a long, accessible frontage, beach frontage. But I think, sorry, Dave.
Yeah, this may not be germane, but my access to the beach is via the public walkway between two condominium developments. There's a walkway out, there's a deck with a couple bench seats, and it seems to be quite adequate to handle the people. I don't see measurable effect with things under the deck particularly. The vegetation goes right up to the edge of it, and we've had so much sand pushed, the distance between the top of the deck and the bottom of the deck and the sand has been limited. But my point is, do we know the size of that deck? Because that would be a good
about 10 by-
illustration.
10 by 12, I would say.
I think it might be a little bigger than that, but it's well under 500 square feet.
And that's a generous deck for public access.
And so I'm just trying to take what we're talking about to something that I know reasonably well.
Right.
And, you know, maybe some size change would be useful. Because Rick's point is that people may have a tendency to build out. Now, it affects a relatively small part of our town, I think, correct? It's not everybody in the town has the
No, but it's-
locations.
But we have a lot of beachfront.
We have a huge amount of
Could be done
beach.
multiple.
Right.
Right.
We're not,
So if you
And
think,
how do places like Delray and other places handle that?
the procedure, as Corey said, you usually have to apply to DEP. DEP will refer back to the local ordinance, but they will express concern if they see
Too
a
big.
violation. So it's a negotiable thing, but I think most communities, you know, have succeeded in keeping them rather modest, rather than, because even the condominiums, I've seen some in Gulfstream that are just walkovers. They're not even decks.
Could you make it up to a certain point, but governed by the overall lot size or
That's
something?
what I'm saying, a ratio.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it may backfire personally, because then you'll start to get.
People build to the max.
Yeah. We have one deck at the end of Edith, no, what's that? Up here, is it, not Edith, the one north of Andrew.
Porter Street.
I should know it because I use it.
Yeah, you go to Edith, and there's a deck on, just to,
You know,
just
there's a
south
house
of.
there that has quite a substantial deck that's,
there's a big deck
on
along
the
there.
street.
yeah,
Oh, gotcha.
which is, I'm sure, non-conforming to your.
Probably already non-conforming, so.
Okay,
All
sorry.
right, so do we want to propose a smaller number, 200 square feet? Is there any type of a thought about this?
Well, correct me, I think you said it. It includes the walkover structure as well, the actual physical ramp, stair, walkway.
The 500-foot calculation? No, I don't think
No.
that was the intent,
No.
No.
It would be
wasn't.
separate,
And
it'd be
I'm
separate
even
from that.
more
Yeah.
advocate.
And you may want
I'm
to,
just looking at it
yeah.
general.
right, you may want to give us some direction, because I think when we were looking at it, it's kind of like, well, should we include that? Should we have language to include? Do you want to include the entire footprint of the structure in that as well? I mean, we could do
I
that
mean,
if you
that's
want,
coverage
but,
as far as I'm concerned, so that's why my mind's thinking that way. You're covering the view,
Right.
so.
so I guess you would want to make sure that if any definition, then it would be whatever the square footage is, that includes the entire footprint of the structure. Is that correct? That's kind of what I'm hearing from the board, that
I
we
think
don't.
so, because you can stand, you can sit, you can walk. It is a structure. I mean, I don't know if you.
I'm not familiar enough with them to say, but, so if you had one that required a longer wooden walkway, then the deck shrinks.
Mhm. All right, well. This is a draft, all right?
Yes.
So, to be discussed. Personally, I think we should have a less, if we go to deck only, that it's I mean, 10 by 20 is a substantial, and that's 200 square feet. My math is correct.
Single family garage.
That's a substantial, and it may be 10 by 15 to one on the end.
It's still big, right? You know,
I would-
200 is probably too
It's,
big.
it's big until half the town shows up, and, but no,
Go on the beach, then you know you did a good job. So I don't know if somebody wants to.
I mean, the only thing that we were looking at is that I'm not quite sure, and we couldn't quite, or I couldn't quite figure this out. If you're having a walkway for just a walkway, but then it's a much wider walkway, so what part is the walkway, what part is the deck if we don't, and that's why I'm just kind of bringing it out that, we may want to include the entire structure as part of the footprint. I don't know, Corey, if it just seems like, and Wayne, it just seems like, I guess in trying to determine on a set of plans what complies and what doesn't comply, if we're looking at the entire footprint of the structure then, and it can only be so big, then we could say, okay, here's what you can do.
walkway have to be handicap compliant?
Pardon me?
Would the walkway have to be handicap
I've seen
compliant?
walkways
Because
and
that
benches
would
on
make it wider.
But it's private, so it doesn't have to be, because it's private
Yeah,
property.
Okay, all right.
Can I make a suggestion to Wayne or Corey? Eisman and Stubbs are coastal engineers that have done just about every walkover structure in Palm Beach County, most of Broward and Monroe. Could we reach out to them? Darwin Stubbs would be the person to see what the average, because they have such a historical reference. I don't know if that makes sense.
Sounds good to me.
That's good.
At least we'll have some basis to make a recommendation.
The other question I had is this coastal construction control line. Is this exempt from, that's our other discussion, but most of the places we're talking about building this is beyond the coastal construction line, so it's just,
Again, it's a DEP,
okay.
that they have the last say. They're the only ones that can permit. Excuse me. We've got from sheds to walkovers.
Right, and I don't know, and once again, I think the other big question that staff had just on the actual kind of dealing more with sheds was like the fence issue where we're recommending that we change the definition of front yard to not include, just as a blanket, any rear yard that abuts a waterway. Because then it seems like we're getting into too many different scenarios where, okay, well, if you have a house, does it have two front yards? Does it, what are we looking at here? So that was one of the reasons we just kind of struck that out. Now, the obvious impact that I think it would have, and I'm not sure, Corey, if we found any other, any other examples of where by removing a rear yard that abuts water from the definition of front yard, people would be able to put in a higher fence there because there's not that restriction on fences in front yards that you can only go up to 4 feet. So we may want to say something on that, but before staff really looked into it a lot, we kind of wanted to get your thoughts on it to see, were you all okay with us doing that? Just, I'm not quite sure why it was put that way. I know Corey and Wayne, we all looked at it and we couldn't quite figure out why they worded it that way. So that's another question, that we as staff would kind of like to see what you think about it, and we can come back with something, or if you want to give us some direction on what your thoughts are.
Anybody?
Few comments in here, and I hope I don't overburden everybody with my thing. On section 3, on the bottom of the second page of the proposed ordinance, and this would be number 2 there, almost to the bottom of the page, and the very last line, it says electrical outlets. I think it might be better to say service rather than outlets. You might have somebody put in a light and say, well, there's no outlets in here. Just a minor, but And then I had the same question over on the next page about, setting the height of the vegetation lower than the height of the shed, or the height of the screening lower than the height of the shed. I don't, and I wouldn't want somebody to build on my property, on the property line adjoining me, and then have a foot of the shed sticking up. And it said in the top of the third page, in B as compared to C, B refers to 6 foot, and then C says it must be screened. So why would we why don't we just drop the part about the 6 foot and say it must be screened?
And we can certainly, I think we can certainly do that, and then that way it's just if they show that it's screened, whether it's vegetation, a fence, or whatever, as long as it is screened now, and that would be up to the building official to determine, okay, so, or, how thick the head, is it properly screened? So,
Right.
and yes, so we can make that change.
Yeah, and
What is the height? When it says 7 feet, is that to the peak? Is that,
I think the way we're looking at that, the 7 feet is the highest point on the shed, is that correct?
Overall height.
Yeah,
okay, so the shed that was,
the roof height.
the shed that was on page, I don't know if there's a page number, was called a Suncast Tremont Gabled Storage Shed.
that's the one I marked.
That shed's 8.5 feet high, so was this an example of a non-conforming?
No, that was just an example of what 80 square feet looks like.
Oh, okay.
That's all that was.
Okay, because I just
Yeah,
wanted
it
to make
says-
it
it
clear
says-
that the appearance of that and the actual measurements, that is not what we want.
That's correct. It's just what,
Okay.
this is in general what 80 square feet would look like, because but it would be no larger, the highest point is no taller than 7 feet is what we're proposing.
Okay?
Or
And,
at least I'm sorry not to interrupt, it seems like that was the direction we'd gotten the last time. If you all want to modify that, you certainly can. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, that was just that was just for my clarification. And, picking up on what Rick is saying, the fact that we're putting a shed, we're inducing 6-foot-high fences between properties, rather than just a requirement to screen it. I don't want to see 6-foot-high fences popping up all over the place in side yards either,
They're pretty well popped up right now.
Well-
Hedges, 12 feet,
Well, I mean, I'd rather see something green than something, whatever. And looking through the documentation of the other towns and stuff that I did, I'm not so sure I'm comfortable with a 3-foot setback. I mean, was this to see if we could fit a 10-by-10 shed in the 15-foot space, in our normal 15-foot setback? Rather than saying, we would like the setbacks, and if you can put a shed in there, that's okay, but the setbacks are more important than the shed size.
The purpose of the setbacks as it applied to, trying to have it fit within the 15 foot and still be able to actually construct a shed there.
That's what I'm
yeah.
saying.
It
And
was,
I
it
don't
was just a
think
guide.
that should be the objective. I think the objective should be, what appearance do we want, or what are we trying to maintain qualitatively in the town? And then if the shed can comply with that, you can put it there. So if you had a 20 or 25-foot side yard, that's fine. But to try to shoehorn a 10-foot shed in there by making the rules make it comply, I don't think that's.
Not a 3 foot to provide a buffer.
And that's a part of it too, because we don't want to have a shed stuck right up against a property line.
Because it's a fire hazard.
And then your sheet flowing water from your roof off that
Right.
shed to your next door neighbor. So you didn't want to get that, so you want to have a kind of a buffer between.
There's lots of
property
communities that
lines.
have 5 or more feet requirement.
Yeah, and we've got, So, but it was hard to accomplish that shed with a 15-foot setback and, you know, based on the size of a maximum 100-foot shed, basically is what the number came down to be.
But I'm saying,
Yeah.
I would rather
Sure.
have the criteria and then you can't put the shed there.
Okay.
I mean, I think
That's
the
fine.
other thing too that we were kind of looking at was you have a lot of existing sheds in the town now that may or may not comply with your code. And so, because right now, you know, accessory structures are not allowed in setbacks. So,
That's another issue.
well, I get it, but I mean, that's something that I think staff was also looking at as well. So that's the other thing, we're trying to kind of have a little bit of harmony here between, you know, currently what it seems like everybody is doing, and to also have some regulations that will you know, kind of provide some guidelines, or more than guidelines, but say, here's what the code is, this is what you can or can't do. So that's kind of where we were coming from on some of this stuff, just so you know.
Wayne, can I ask, what constitutes a permit requirement for a shed? I mean, as I said, I didn't get into this, but
We've got administrative, there's a couple of things that we're looking at, going back to what Rick said.
the reason I
before.
ask, I was just flicking through some of the other town references. Some of them say that any shed has to have a permit.
And the discussion came up in terms of the difference between a throwaway shed and a shed meeting the wind load. If we're issuing a permit, then it has to meet the wind loads. A throwaway shed wouldn't meet those wind loads because that's basically a typical small Rubbermaid. So by your own standards, you can't approve a permit for something that wouldn't meet the wind load in the first place. So that was one of the dilemmas that we faced. So therefore, we wanted to distinguish the difference between those and the disposable ones that, hey, you can pick up at Home Depot, you can still have it, but it would be an administrative item versus the building code item. There's more of a zoning review more than a building review, because a building review requires it to meet the wind load.
Well, where I'm heading is, and I may be wrong, is that if I go and get a prefab Rubbermaid or whatever, and I just plunk it on anywhere on the site, and it starts affecting my neighbors, I mean, shouldn't we have some administrative review or something?
Well, we are.
Yeah, it would be
We are.
We do,
administrative
but
review.
I don't know, I doubt if any, or the majority of the residents even know that requirement.
And part of that would be the anchoring mechanism of it. The difference, the distinction being, if it has to meet the building code, then it has to meet uplift and so on.
No, I understand
So
all that,
I
I'm just
didn't
saying
wanna-
the portable ones that
Sure.
people plop anywhere they wish, and how that affects, does it? I just think we need to broadcast something
Yes, yeah.
to the residents, so, instead of having a neighbor coming and complaining, and then we get into a domestic war. Okay, sorry.
If
I'm
you're,
not for regulating everything.
Yeah.
if you're in the administrative area, so 26 to 100 feet, shouldn't we at least specifically state that it should be anchored?
And it provides some kind of an anchoring. Yes, and that's fine.
But I
That's
mean, but be in here so that when somebody reads this, they clearly know that they have to, that when you come and review it, you're going to expect it to be anchored.
Yeah, and part of the manufacturer's installation, a lot of them do say anchoring, so it's a tie-down anchoring system that is
Correct.
versus a bolt.
If it's done, assembled properly.
Correct, or have a bolt anchoring, that's the mechanism in place. So it'll be something better than just plopping it on the property.
I would just like to see that in
Yeah.
here so that, you know,
Sure.
someone doesn't get surprised.
Sure.
And we have here domestic equipment. could we specifically say no motor vehicles?
And on that one, we can even include also no plumbing or electrical, period.
Yes,
Done.
that's,
Yes,
That would be good.
that'd be fine.
All right. Any more
But
comments?
one other, it said it has to be in harmony, in color harmony with the main structure, but we don't have any codes about
harmony.
colors, right? So if somebody has an outrageous color scheme already, they can have an outrageous shed, but if they have an outrageous shed and not, it's not allowable.
And I think that came
That
from
came
your,
from
your
this
last
committee.
meeting, which I'm not quite sure how we would actually enforce that, to be honest with you, because his definition of harmony, I'm sure, is different from my definition, so it's just, I'm not quite sure how that would work, to be honest with you. So, I don't know if you want to get into colors or not, but,
I think the screening is the key.
okay, I mean, I'd be more than happy to kind of remove that, but yeah.
Okay, any other comments from commission, staff, sorry? Oh, on public, sorry. Why not?
Oh, can I go back and talk about the one other thing we said, the existing sheds, are we going to take a position on conformity, time, or are we staying away from that?
Well, I think we'll see maybe when we adopt something and see where we're at on that and
Okay.
how that impacts maybe existing ones, and then we might have an amortization period of a long period of time to,
You know the grandfather definition better than anybody.
I know,
Leave it alone.
I know. So, okay.
I like that.
Yes, sir.
Commissioners. Mr. Shutt. I'm Ned Kimmelman. I'm an attorney. I represent, would you like me to speak up?
We can't hear you.
I'm Ned Kimmelman. I represent Dr. and Mrs. Louis Venus. They live at 50 Harbor Drive South. They have a shed. It's been dismantled. They were cited quite some time ago, I believe within the last year. It's been laying on the grass, rotting that out for some time. That's the way it goes. But I'm trying to make it so they can enjoy the shed that they have there probably for 2 decades until a neighbor complained. And I understand you just talked about that, Mr. Hennigan. And that's understandable that, you don't want to get into the business of prioritizing a fence or a structure on a property line versus, which comes first. Do you really want to prioritize the shed versus what you've got on the property line to begin with if you're going to choose a fence? But here's the way I look at this and I'd like to see happen. They have a shed, and this is an example because there are a lot of sheds in your community. I looked at it, and the size in the last proposal here was 144 feet. Now we're down to, I believe, 100, and your height, you want 7 feet now. I heard you say that, gee, the roof shouldn't be taller than the fence. Agreed. What sense does that make? Now you're allowing a 7-foot-high shed, but you're saying a 6-foot-high opaque fence would be sufficient to screen it from the neighbor if it's a prefabricated fence. That's the current part of the current proposal. Problem with that is that, for instance, my client, his shed, because of the shape of the lot, and I don't think it's too different from a lot of the waterfront lots that you have, he has only one place that he can put the shed, which he did for years. He has it outside of the setback, but you only allow a 4-foot-high fence for that footage from the waterfront, from the edge of his property near the waterfront. Behind the shed, you want a 6-foot fence. He can't do both. So you're giving with one hand and you're taking away with the other. So if you're properly outside a setback and you got your shed, you're still within the footage where you can't put more than 4 feet. So how can you comply and put 6 feet? You can't. That's the only thing that stopped him. He has 4. He couldn't go 6, so he was going to put a lattice and go 6 feet high. That's one of the problems. The other is, I just heard discussion about leaving it to the building official to determine whether it properly screens the neighbor. You know, if you're gonna go ahead and buy fencing, or you're gonna go ahead and buy a shed, you'd have to come to the building official beforehand and say, hey, this is what I wanna do. I want you to come out and look at something that I wanna do. And then you're putting the building official in the position, if he'll even do it, to say, yeah, if you do that, that's gonna be okay, instead of, I've done it, it's good or it's no good. So you incur cost if you put in words like, we're gonna be able to say, the building official, this screens it from the neighbor or not. And of course, you're gonna hear it from the neighbor saying, you know, that's not good enough. They may even have, in this case, the neighbor from next door to my client has very high bushes, and they're so thick, and you couldn't even see the shed to begin with, but there's a lot of enmity between the two of them. That's how I get here. And I've been, you know, nonetheless, there are probably more than just the case of my client and his neighbor where it would be a problem, even if they don't dislike each other. They're going to have a problem, perhaps, if a building official comes along and says, you know, I think this is sufficient screening with 6 or even 7-foot hedge fence. Or if instead of a fence you have, you know, 7 feet, it's a certain, an arboretum and this type of foliage, and it's real thick, and you couldn't possibly see through it, but the neighbor says, you know, I disagree with the building official, and I can see through it, and this is a pain, and I don't like this. So you've got so much indefiniteness when you don't have something like I see here, which is 6 feet. And I tell you, if my roof line of my shed is above that fence, I know I'm gonna have trouble from the neighbor. But once I cover that height with a fence, that should be it. Because if you start to say, I'm gonna let the building official determine that, then you're really, never mind about inciting a problem with the neighbor because of the height of a fence, you're really gonna have a problem if you start to be that subjective. What really stops the vision from a neighbor? You know, one type of a hedge or another, certain height, certain thickness, does it have to be maintained over time? I mean, do you have to cut that over time and make sure, because you'll have a continuing problem. A landscaper makes a mistake, they complain, they say, gee, that hedge is no good. If you give something definite, you know, and I saw this 6 feet, I could you know, my client could do that. If you would make it so he can do 6 feet instead of 4 feet. Okay, because the way it is now, you're requiring him to comply with both. He can't go over 4 feet if he's within a certain footage from the water's edge property. At the same time, you're allowing him to have a shed if he goes 6 feet. He can't, because you told him he can't go more than 4 feet. So we're in that position right now. And again, I just, let me look at a couple of notes that I have here. Tell you, I've represented Dr. Venus for many years. This is, I wasn't planning on saying this. I represent him in things that have nothing to do with this. This is something I followed for over 10 years, that I have tremendous knowledge about these neighbors. I never wanted to be here talking about this, let alone in a courtroom. It's not what I've done for 40 years. But I'll tell you, they're not alone, as I said, with the shed. And I'm just asking that you consider making a definite, like a fence. You don't leave it subjective to the building official. You're looking for more trouble than you would if you're just putting a fence there. And I think people should be able to have a shed. Because once you start saying, I'm more worried about the fencing than I am about the setback, no one's going to be able to have a shed, because you have these odd-shaped lots, and it's very tight all the time. So I just want to let you know I have some perspective over the years on what these things look like, where they're positioned on the different lots in the town. Again, it's a catch-22. My client's in that position. Probably some other people are too, with the 4 feet versus the 6 feet with all these waterfront lots. So I'd ask you to try to accommodate that and not leave it subjective. You know, it sounds, when I first heard that about leaving it subjective and not saying a certain fence height, just eliminate that completely, let the building official determine if it's screened. I'm thinking, boy, that's going to be more of a fight than you had if you just had a set amount of fence height. Again, I'll go out and buy a hedge, and I'll go out and have it constructed if I know it's going to pass inspection. And if you tell me it's up to the building official whether it screens the next door or not, that's not going to do it. who would spend money and even on a prefabricated shed and do that? Only to be told by the official, you shouldn't have done that. Whereas if I have the exact footage, I know exactly what I gotta do.
Okay, thank you. Any,
I wanted to ask one question, because the water, the setback you're talking about, the 4 foot only extends like 5 feet from the property line, and then after that, it can go up with no height specified, is that correct?
No,
I mean,
that's not
Wayne
my-
would know this.
That wasn't my understanding. I thought it was way farther back than that. That's why I got a problem.
How
Otherwise,
far
I
back
wouldn't
does
have
that
to-
go?
Does,
Because of the way the definition is reading, where in the front is defined as in the, where the rear property is looked at just like the front of the property, because it touches the water's edge. You can go back as much as, the front would have been, which would have been 25 feet. So that was why the property.
25 feet,
Yeah,
and it's limited to what height?
that's 4 feet. So that's why there is a
That's a viewing.
discrepancy in the definitions.
So when you translate it to the back, it really becomes a problem. No one's gonna put it in the front, but because of that definition, he's in a catch-22. I'd ask you to consider that. It's not him alone. And the 6 is one thing. I'd go 7 to stop the roof line. Do something practical, and then it makes sense. Thank you.
thank you. Yeah, I think, I'm not in favor of increasing the 6 foot fence to 7 feet to start with. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here. I think, couldn't this go to the Board of Appeals as a unique situation and have, rather than changing an ordinance, can it go to the Board of Appeals and show that the condition and hardship, and if a 6 foot fence would achieve the screening, appeal to the Board of, as a Board of Adjustment, I deal with so many of these.
yeah,
As a specific case, rather than creating a blanket modification, which I'm not in favor of. First of it.
yeah, I mean, I think once we started looking at this, I think that's why Corey brought it up, because it's kind of like, look, we do have an issue in the code that we kind of need to address, not irrespective of, any specific examples. This is just we started looking at this, we're really looking at this as a global, not addressing any particular property, but just, okay, how do we want to kind of go forward with this? Because right now, it seems like there might be, an issue of, people are putting up sheds in easements that they aren't allowed to do that. Our code doesn't allow for that, period, right now, but yet they exist. And, how do we want to kind of deal with that? In accordance with, possibly coming up with some revised regulations. And then the fence issue, or the front yard issue, I think we need to address that one way or the other. We need to somehow kind of address that, because I think that's, that once we know that that's there, I think once we start looking, or once Corey starts looking and examining plans when they come in, it's kind of like, okay, how do you address it on some cases where somebody has 2 front yards, but it's not on it's not adjacent to 2 streets, one's on the waterway and things like that. So it's almost like we kind of need to address
I think
that.
the waterway one was to preserve, adequate viewing to the water, so you don't have these compounds going to the seawall.
Of course, the thing about it is there's no regulation on the side vegetation that you can have.
Right,
So
but
you
it's
could-
that's not a permanent improvement. I think
Okay.
That's a difference. But, I mean, this is a pre-existing condition. And if the owner or resident can prove that there's no other area that's been here, I just don't think we should be broad brushing that and trying to revise the ordinance any further. I mean, I'm open to suggestions, but we can't respond to every peculiarity.
No, and I'm sure there's lots, this is just one of many.
Yeah. And, let them explain, and this gentleman can present his case as he sure is very capable of to the Board of Adjustments. I don't, I just, sorry, I'm practical. Bear with me.
I can appreciate his argument, though. You know, the hedge would block it from my point of view, but if
If it's
there's
in the eyes
if
of
there's
the
an
ball,
animus going on, it's not gonna, you know, make something
It never-
happen.
Unless it's
So-
Can I add one more thing? I'll get out of here. You know, his particular situation on his lot, that, the only place he can put his shed is against the property line, actually. And there are a number of other lots just like that. So if you say the setback is first, you know, he's got to be 3 feet. He's not going to be able to do it. So he has to go against the line, which is where he's been forever. And then he can't put vegetation in if he's got the fence in. He can't do both in the same spot. So it's another catch-22. It's difficult. If I have to go that way, you know, I'll go board adjustment or whatever it is, but
A 7-foot fence or a 6-foot fence?
what
I think it's
happens?
more of a Board of Adjustment
Yeah, I
item
think
than a
this is a
zoning.
peculiar situation. It's obviously pre-existing.
Because, you know, if you have a 6-foot fence and you got a 7-foot high, you're certainly going to be in trouble. You should have to have more than the fence. I mean,
We don't want some.
Yeah.
Um,
Thanks very much
I
for
don't
your
know.
time.
Brian would,
Well, I mean, I think what we were trying to do, because we know that, you know, this is not the only situation out there, that there are others. And so then, you know, we've been made aware of those.
Right, we're the only
With-
ones who made to take it down.
Right, that we've received complaints about others, so we would have to address those complaints. And that's when we started looking at it to say, okay, do we need to modify our code to kind of try to address something that seems to have become, let's say, the rule and not the exception, for lack of a better term. So that's what we were trying to do.
No, I just don't think we want to encourage sheds on property lines, whether they're pre-existing or not. That's,
no, I agree, but I mean, it's, if there's a hardship for some reason, we haven't seen the specific exhibit, so it's hard to, in my mind, I can't.
and
I
we're
just
we're
don't
not,
think- I don't want to see us revise.
right, this group is not
here.
to try to arbitrate
No,
individual situations. That's what the Board of Adjustments is for.
yeah, that's my point. It's-
Agree.
All right, any other discussion on any other public comments?
Well, if I can, I'm not quite sure, what exactly is the direction on this? Do you want us to go forward with this or not go forward, or,
But I think,
it needs
some comments have been made regarding,
and we can address those on the dune crossovers and those type of things, okay.
I think it's, does that come back to us before it goes to
Yes.
commission?
Yes, I think we would. I think we would bring that back to you because we'll need to get Corey's input and everything on that. But as far as sheds go, then, do you want us to try to address anything on that? Or is there, I guess, is the direction to, you don't want
I
to?
would like to see the setback limits changed, the item C2B. I would like to see the 3 go to 5, and I don't want to see things go to the lot line, even if there's a fence. That's my input. I think we have to have standards, and if the shed can comply, the shed can go. And if the shed can't comply with the standards, then you need a smaller shed or you need to put it somewhere else. I don't think the design criteria should be, how do we fit a 100-square-foot shed into our puzzle? I think it's a qualitative appearance issue. And it becomes even more dramatic if both neighbors decide to do the same thing with what's here. That's definitely non-curb appeal.
Okay. and
I
then-
agree with, I definitely agree with not on the property line. That's, 3 feet seems reasonable.
I'm okay with 3 feet, but not on the property line.
I'm all right on the property line. There's so many places that exists, including my yard, neighbors' yards. It's the yard in question. I mean, that's my point of view, and that's how I feel about it. So, you know, it'd be nice if I had 20-foot or more setbacks on each side. I don't, and none of my immediate neighbors do. So, I mean, it's great if you have the space to consider a more limiting deal. But I don't think, do we have that many sheds that are 100 square feet in the town? I don't know. It's like we worry about build out on decks out onto the dunes and this and that, but how many of these sheds really are that big and that problematic? One, obviously, but do we have lots of them?
No, I understand, and those popped up over time for practical reasons, but I think, unfortunately, you know, owners are going to try to push the envelope, and that's why we gotta put some kind of gavel down and say, hey, we need to restrict. Nobody's trying to deny anybody having sheds or anything, but I think if we don't, we're just gonna, I mean, your intentions are good, I'm sure. Were they right? Who knows? But I don't think we make that a
Well,
stand.
if you guys wanna go with the setback, I just wanna stand
just gives us-
as somebody who's
It
not.
stops some of
favorable.
this
That's fine.
situation. I mean,
Yeah, what we're talking about, is this a major problem within our town? I mean, really major, or is this just something that popped up because of a disagreement? I think that's what's happening.
well,
And now we're, you know, getting into the weeds on it. It's like,
I just think
give me a cup of
we've
coffee.
been made aware of it, and we're just trying to protect, you know, other property owners' rights, and
Well, I mean, we'll either have to, well, I'll leave that up to Tracy there to either start citing the other property owners, or, you know, if we, you know, do something with the code to
I don't think
kind
you
of
should be
provide.
citing. If a legitimate complaint comes in, then that's the point of,
We've received
But there have
those.
been.
That's it, that's what I'm saying. That's the reason this is in front of you. We've
Right.
received those, and our next step, I believe, is, okay, we either go out with code enforcement, or we, you know, kind of look at the code and see what we can do.
The ex-mayor. That's shit, and it's not in compliance, so, thank you very much, but I do think that, you're gonna be depriving a lot of people who have sheds of the ability to use their lots, which may not be as sizable and shaped the way that yours are, but you're gonna be, put it this way, if whoever's not complying, it shouldn't be a complaint that comes in, the town should go out and make them take that shed down. It's not right for it to just be one family that gets victimized like that. That's not right. Thank you very much for your time.
okay, thank you. All right, Brian, are you as confused as I am?
Well, I think what we can do is we can try to come back
I
with
know there's a reason I
something.
pointed all this shit.
Yeah, no, I know, yeah, I know. I think what we can do is we can kind of make some changes and bring this back to you, and,
Yeah, let's tidy it up and see if we can move it ahead.
Mark, we did not hear if there was a consensus Neil wanted to move it from a 3 to a 5, and then other committee members said leave it at
So we need
3.
to
We need a
make a motion.
consensus, yeah.
well, I don't know if you need to make, I mean, just
Just a
consensus. Is
consensus.
it 3 to?
3 or 5.
I'm a 3.
I'm fine with 3.
I'm okay with 3.
Want enough room that there can be
Some
vegetation behind it.
Okay, but you don't.
I wouldn't want somebody have a common hedge on a property line, and somebody come up and tear down part of that hedge to build on the property line. So
Okay.
it's gotta be,
Right, but you don't, in no event, you don't want the shed to be able to go right abut the property line. You want at least that 3 foot.
at least 3
Okay.
foot.
Yep.
All right, okay.
Okay, and what's the distance from the house or the garage or the structure?
That's their,
Doesn't matter.
We don't regulate that. I mean, we're just looking at setbacks
they
on the
can't get
property
by their
line.
shed, that's their.
Yeah, because I've seen them the other way, where they attach them to the house, and that's, or the side of the garage, and that's a pretty good solution.
No, I don't think we need to.
Yeah.
Okay?
We're more
Okay.
protecting the neighbors. Okay,
Yeah.
By the way, Tracy, housekeeping,
Yes,
we need you.
The shed.
It
yes,
just
we've
rains.
explored
Can't
that.
even see your page.
Yes,
Right,
we've been trying.
okay. Okay, well, move on to draft ordinance regarding coastal control construction line.
And just very quickly on this, we were directed to make changes regarding the, I guess, construction east of the coastal construction control line. And I know I'm probably going to get this messed up, so just, if you thought the first one was confusing. On this one here, the 1990 or the 1997 coastal construction line is further west than the 79 coastal construction control line. I believe I'm saying that correct. So,
You are.
okay, so basically what we've said, one of the issues that we've run into is determining the amount of lot area for those homes that abut the Atlantic Ocean. How far out do you count as far as buildable or usable land area to be counted for essentially FAR? And the definition that we had in here really didn't make a lot of sense because the Department of Health doesn't determine anything. So we decided to remove that, but what we found is for all practical purposes, is that the line, the 1979 line, I believe, is the line that we would look at to say, okay, this is the line that we would look at to say you can't go any further east of that line as determining lot area, because I believe in most cases the 79 line fits around the top of the dune, which we would look at as far as usable land area in relation to FAR anyway, and I believe that that is what staff has kind of indicated as that's the line that they've used in the past anyway. So we aren't taking away someone's land area or anything like that as it relates to FAR based on their past practice. So this just kind of codifies that. Now what we're also saying is that if there is any construction that is east of the 97 line, well, no, let me see, no, 79 line, sorry, that construction would only be allowed if there's existing, if there's existing structures there now, somebody could go back and replace that structure, but not in an amount that is greater than what currently exists. So we aren't removing that either. If someone already has a structure, part of a structure that exists east of the 79 line, they can still go back and do that as well. I think those are primarily the major changes. I don't know, Corey, if you have anything to add to that, please do.
Chairman, Commissioners, I think the only thing really to add is just to clarify the floor area ratio calculation, and what you see in the definitions is that for properties that are split by a roadway with, similar to the dune crossover discussion that we had on the last item, you can count 1,000 square feet of the land eastward of that roadway in your floor area ratio calculation. So this is, these proposed changes are intended to clean up that language so that it's clearer, once again, for both applicants and staff interpreting it. And really takes into account past practice in terms of enforcement and interpretation. And as Brian said, there's where the language currently references the public health unit, there is no such definition in public health. So it is an attempt at least to try to clarify how that's being administered.
I've got a question. Are we saying here, and I know it's a Corey question, but I'll address it to Corey, that the 79 line is the line of which we'll use to measure the setback from, or that you can build right up to the 79 line?
Coming to that. There are two issues here.
Right.
You know, and you've just crossed over. Let's stick with the first one, and I was gonna come with your point or your question. I think this is a definitive line that's recorded in survey, so it's a point of reference that makes sense, so I don't think there's any
Right, so,
discussion about that. To your question, how are we using that as a setback for a rear setback? How are we establishing, is that?
yeah, my question is that line like a back property line, and you still come 25 feet off of that? Or is it that that's the line of which you can build up to? And the important part is the note that was just made earlier, is that the 79 line runs approximately the crest of the dune. So if we allow building up to the 79 line, we're damaging our dune.
Well, basically, I mean, buildings aren't allowed to extend east of the 97 line, which I don't know how many feet it varies, that's further west
That's not
than the 79 line.
You can't-
And, well, unless you get DEP approval.
And that's-
Yes, yeah, right.
And there seems to be pretty liberal DEP approval these days.
Yes.
So we should try to set it the way we think it's best for this town, not rely on E DEP.
What we're trying to do here is that we're trying to define usable buildable lot. So what portion of that lot is used in the calculations? And to establish the most eastward line, some of these properties say they can build all the way up to the Atlantic, which means it takes over to do it, and that their property line goes to the waters of the Atlantic. In defining usable lot and buildable lot, we're trying to use the 79 line as the most eastward line. That's
We need to protect our
general.
dune. And
Which is-
and if you're saying that somebody could build a swimming pool on the 79 dune, on the line, even if it's at the crest of the dune, that's troubling.
Yeah, I think setback is a whole lot.
No, I mean, your setbacks would come, and maybe we need to explain that a little bit better, because if you look at the top of page 5, where we talk about where we go, a dune extends landward from the aforesaid setback line. And basically, we need to refer to that 79 line, I think, as the setback line. And then you would take, and then whatever your rear setback would be, it would be from the 79 line.
Correct.
So I need to clarify that. I hear what you're saying,
But
because
swimming pools are 7.5 feet, is that the current number?
It's 5 feet.
5 feet.
5 feet.
So it could, if the 79 line is the top of the dune, we're allowing damage to the dune in essence.
Well, I mean, basically, that's why we have language in there that appropriate measures shall be taken. But once again, to restabilize the dune pursuant to specification approved by the town manager, that's where the dune extends landward of the 79 line. And I don't know how, in looking at this, I don't know how often that occurs.
Let me just give you a little information on, I think your vision is digging a pool 8 foot deep and excavating that amount of the dune. DEP requires that every cubic yard that's removed is mitigated within that area, within the 89, is it 89? 79.
79.
No, I mean, but the one further west.
97.
97. So anything in front of that, eastward of that 97, if you remove 1 cubic yard, you've got to mitigate it somewhere on the site. So there is this kind of trade-off area. That's how they protect, the dune. So you're not just excavating or removing. You've got to compensate for whatever you disturb or affect. So, but I think it's clear, and other communities use that 79 line as their rear setback reference point. So I think it's a good solid, it occurs on every survey that you ever have on a property that's in that area. So it's a consistent reference point. It's not going to be fair to some of them that are currently east of even the 79, but
other question I had was, and I can't find exactly here, I thought I'd marked it, the replacement of the structures that are, that straddle the line or east of the line. It said that they can build within the footprint, but I didn't see any height restriction or size restriction, so could they, in essence, take a house out, duplicate the footprint, and build a house twice as big?
Let's say that you
Yes.
had a footprint there and there was a single-family home on that, and then they want to put a two-story home back.
Yes,
Um,
yes, they can.
By this reading, yes, they would be allowed to do that because we're looking at the footprint.
And is that desirable from,
That's consistent with all other communities, as long as you do not impact the perimeter of the existing structure. You can put new piles through an existing stem wall footing, just to give you an example, to build a second story. That's allowable throughout most areas, if not all. So, as the envelope is the determining or the delineation of expansion.
so you could, in theory, build something considerably up to whatever is allowable under the
With the
FAR?
other code restrictions, yes. Can't expand, but you can add to. Horizontal expansion, sorry. It works very well in other areas. Okay, any other discussion on that?
Christine's raising.
I'd like to make comments, maybe a little bit more questions. Step outside for a minute.
I may be out
Did I
too.
do that right, Brian?
Well, actually, I mean, they don't have to step out, they can stay in, it's just, we don't want to get into conversations, so, yeah.
Okay. A lot of this came up from when we were looking at our comprehensive plan a year and a half ago with Marty Miner. And I was the one that was very strong and actually started this ball rolling about the CCL and the fact that it's a moving target and the fact that we do have a lot of grandfather type situations, but at some point, our restrictions can always be stricter than what happens at the state level, and I think we have a fiduciary duty not only to the residents who build there, but to our town ourselves to preserve our dune. Also, for the stability and the sustainability on a barrier island, we shouldn't be here anyways, but that's another story. So the whole premise from which this started was to respect what was there from the 79 line, respect the grandfathering of it, but to use the 97 line for new construction or 50% more rebuild. And that was kind of the qualification that we've used for a lot of things. If you're gonna do it brand new again, or you're gonna do more than 50%, I think it's either in footprint or in value, you have to live up to a new thing. So I just wanted to give you the perspective of where this all started. It really wasn't about establishing the 79 line as a setback or a rear setback or anything else like that. It was looking much broader and looking at the 97 portion and to see how we can stop the encroachment that seems to be happening eastward, getting closer and closer to the beach. We have problems in the town with people claiming rights to the beach, not claiming rights to the beach. If you start to build closer to it, obviously, then you feel like you own more of it. So that is where it all came from, and I just wanted to give you that perspective. I know that it is probably the opposite end of the pendulum, because you always have this bell curve, but that's where we started to see, could we get closer to that 97 line for new construction if something wasn't already grandfathered in, so.
Was this a consensus move from the town commission, or
No.
is this motivation
This was,
From-
this was,
from your best interest?
now the consensus did come from the commission to look at this issue and to research it and to take a further look at it. So, but we didn't say as a commission, we want this, we want that. We just said, as a commission, we're concerned about it. It seems to continue to creep and encroach. Let's send it to planning and zoning and see what's going on.
And to further on that just a little bit, if I may, your coastal management element in your comp plan, goal 1 is to conserve, manage, and sensitively use the environmental assets of Ocean Ridge's coastal zone location. That's goal one of the comp plan.
Right, and I think this achieves that personally. Again, you have to look at it, if anybody's gonna construct a new house, we've raised, DEP is now raised even above the FEMA level, and it averages about 17 and a half feet. So there's gonna be rebuilding of the dune, just by that, forcing them to elevate their structure. So the fear that things are gonna be excavated and removed is really not correct. Because I think DEP, they're the managers of the environment of that zone, beach zone. But I think, to the point, there were, not many years ago, people could actually use submerged property east, underwater, to achieve FAR. So we have come a long way in preserving, but I think it's only fair on our residents. And as we all know, I mean, I don't want to say, but there's a value issue here. I mean, you've got some prime real estate. And I think our duty is to give them a defined reference point on which they can develop their property and to meet the codes that are here. I don't think, I mean, I think we're conserving. I think there's a lot of improvement going on. But I think we need to have some very strong and definite reference points by which people can develop their properties. I don't think, sorry, go ahead.
Commissioner DeJesus mentioned 50% or more if it was replacement, if it was east of the 97 line. That's not in here, though. That was a desire, not something that we've incorporated.
No, she's referencing what new construction will be defined as a substantial improvement greater than 50%. We'd have to use whatever the new building codes are. So if you had a vacant piece of lot, this is the governance under which it's being built. That's what that reference was being made to.
So you're, on the seaward side, if you're doing something brand new, your setback is gonna be based on the 79 line.
Correct.
DEP is gonna cover everything from the 97 line.
Yes.
So at least we're achieving a setback, which may not be exactly ideal, but I think it does help preserve value to whoever
Value
owns the property.
And we're assured that 25 feet is going to be preserved. So I think, and elevated.
Yep.
So I think it's doing what it's intended to do, hopefully. So anyway, I do, that's a fancy
Time for
graphic.
Call
Any
for
further-
adjournment?
Well, do we have any direction on the CCCL ordinance? Do you want to move that to the town commission? Is it good the way it's written, or does it need work?
Or do you want us to add just a little phrase there under 6718 to make sure that it's referenced that the 79 line is the setback line?
I think that's.
Yeah, I'll add that in there, so, okay.
With that change, I'll move that we adopt this and move it forward.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. With that,
Movement to adjourn.
Second.
all in favor?
Thank you, Mark.
Mark did a good job, thank you.
I don't know what I'm doing.
No, you did great.
You did great.
Thank you. I do care for the control line.
Thank you.